For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. The Chinese Communist Party, it has held the country together. It has also allowed a lot number of people, the Chinese people, to come out of poverty. But it has also become more and more authoritarian as it has completed the grip on the Chinese nation. What is it in store for the Chinese people and for the Chinese Communist Party, and how it has evolved is a discussion we are doing in a special series on the CCP. And joining me today is someone who has lived in China, someone who watches China, and someone who consults on China, both in China itself and from across the world. Bonnie Girard is a specialist on China, has lived in China, and is joining us from near Washington, D.C., and of course knows China better than most other people. Welcome to this program, Bonnie Girard. Let me start by asking you, you've lived in China, you watch China. Do you see the existence and the predominance of the Communist Party of China in the day-to-day lives of the ordinary Chinese? Is it overwhelming, or is it sort of in the background?
It's a bit of both. That's a very good question. It's omnipresent. The influence and the power of the party is omnipresent in the everyday lives of all Chinese citizens, whether it be in their companies, where if the company is large enough, there's a party secretary who takes care of all personnel matters, and personnel matters means anything having to do with the lives of the workers and staff and management of the company, whether it be in neighborhoods in which there are party members who act as neighborhood watchers and people who are taking care of the neighborhood, to use a euphemism, whether it be in schools which have curriculums which are completely defined by the Communist Party. So the influence becomes present at a very early age, right? This begins, and of course the Chinese educational system is controlled not only at a local grassroots level, but at a national level by the parties, so that the curriculum straight through is very much in favor of what the party wants it to be.
Indeed. You have lived in China since '87, so you would have been witness to the Tiananmen Square incident. I don't want to call it massacre, but the incident there. And was that a turning point in the lives of the citizens? Because that time it seemed as if a new wind was blowing, some more openness was being ushered in. But suddenly the crackdown came, and after that, I think there is no looking back for the Chinese Communist Party, even if we look back, say, 30, 35 years. What is your view on that?
For me, I believe that Tiananmen Square, what happened in Tiananmen Square, was not only a turning point for the Chinese people, it was also the fuel which led to economic reforms which had already started in small steps, but it led to those economic reforms being accelerated because the party had to find a way to distract the population, and it had to find a way to bring in investment and technology even faster than it had already done. And so Deng Xiaoping, who certainly played a large role in making the decision that the military would go in the first place, also made the decision in 1992 to let certain parts of the Chinese economy just go. And this is what turned the people's attention away from political matters, because Beijing, certainly in Beijing, I lived in Beijing at that time, Beijing was, as you can imagine, a city full of fear, anger, and enormous resentment, even among party members. And that's important to remember, even among party members, about what happened in Beijing in the early morning hours of June 4th, 1989. There was consensus among people, even where there were differences there was consensus on the horror. But what Deng Xiaoping did was he said, and this has been often repeated, but the significance is how it ties back to Tiananmen. He said to get rich is glorious. And immediately after that, people who had called each other comrade and people who had lived within the structures of a very tightly controlled communist command economy began realizing their entrepreneurial dreams. The example that I use most often is grandmothers started knocking out their living rooms so they could open up a little shop to sell things like soft drinks and cigarettes at a small profit. And this is in a country in which, when I arrived there in 1987, the word profit and the word capitalist were taboo, dirty words. So the explosion of the Chinese economy throughout the 1990s is well known and well understood. And I see it, having lived that entire period there. My perspective is Tiananmen is what accelerated that growth.
Indeed, I think the Chinese Communist Party has delivered double-digit growth for such a long time and has brought so many hundreds and thousands of people, millions of them, in fact, out of poverty. That has been their claim to legitimacy. But now the question is, in its 100th year, can it sustain the same level of economic development, GDP growth, and give the same prosperity or same assurance to the large population? If it doesn't, does it then get threatened by resentment, by discontentment amongst the people? How do they manage that balance? The Chinese Communist Party is the question that some of us who have traveled to China but have not lived there always have had this.
So you're talking about, can the party sustain itself with lower economic growth, I think it can, as long as incomes rise. But I don't necessarily think that if the Chinese Communist Party ultimately fails, and there are a lot of people who hope it does, and many of them are in China, I don't think it would necessarily be on economic lines alone. China have created a devil for themselves, in my view. China has allowed, the party has allowed a very significant portion of its population to become well-educated, to become well-traveled, to become educated overseas, and to have had the privilege of an economic life that is secure and prosperous and at times even luxurious. And this is something that China has never seen in these numbers before. And I know when I meet Chinese students in Britain, where I often am, or in the United States or around the world, they're often bewildered, but they're also enlightened in ways that they might not yet like to express because they are still students and they're still young, and they also don't want any negative effects to be felt by their families back home. But they have seen and heard what the rest of the world and how the rest of the world lives and prospers. And I think a lot of those values are being found in Chinese young people in ways that they weren't and possibly never would be taught by the Communist Party. And they're asking questions. They're asking questions. They see, for example, both of us come from countries which are democracies, and democracies are a messy way of determining our political futures. But they work, ultimately, we find. And to the authoritarian mind, this is impossible. It's terrifying that such a mess could work, but it does. And I think that this message is getting across to young Chinese students around the world and to Chinese inside of China as well, as the generations, as that generation of the Cultural Revolution folks who are now parents and grandparents, that generation is fading away and their influence is fading away. So I see some hope.
Indeed, but if you go by the recent literature and some pronouncement by Xi Jinping, the party seems to be thinking that it will continue to have the hold on the Chinese people. It will continue to determine the future of the Chinese people. And Xi Jinping even tells the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, that it has to follow the party's diktat. So in that sense, are they really cut off from reality, or are they just hoping that the kind of stronghold or the stranglehold that the party has over the people will continue to make people beholden to the party? What is the sense that you get that is the Chinese Communist Party really adopting to the needs of the future, where people will demand these answers, as you said, more and more people will want democracy, or at least some kind of freedom. Are they able to reconcile these two contradictory streams of thoughts?
Let me take a different approach to answering your question, and if I may. I'd like to reflect for a moment on what the Chinese Communist Party has done over the last 100 years. And let's keep in mind that for the first 40 of those years, it was not in power. It was fighting for power. So let's take a look at what it's done. So it, in the late 50s, engendered through horrific policies, the Great Leap Forward, which killed somewhere between 15 and 55 million people. And the fact that that statistic isn't even known, that the number of people isn't even known, is horrific in itself. And then we had the Cultural Revolution for 10 years, from 66 to 76, in which China essentially cannibalized itself and cannibalized its spirit and its soul. And there are people today, we heard one recently here in the US, a Chinese woman who got up to speak before a school board about trends she's seeing in education curriculums here in the US. And she talked about her experience going through the Cultural Revolution in her 20s and what a horror it was. And then, of course, we've had Tiananmen. And we all know, sitting outside of China, about Tibet, and we know about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and we know, and the Chinese know as well. So this party has really not, in my view, had a great deal of success over its 100 years. I don't even attribute the economic growth to the Chinese Communist Party, because it is the people of China who did the heavy lifting. It is the people of China, once the party said, okay, we're not going to control you, just go out and make money. And they did, by God, they did. Tremendously and terrifically. So in my view, the party has its greatest success in inverse proportion to the control which it puts over its people. And the place that we're at now with Xi Jinping, who is not widely loved, either by people, or it may surprise you to hear, by many in the party, and I'll come back to that in a moment. This position that we're in now is something that people 10 and 15 years ago were saying could never happen again. People in China were saying, we will never go back to how it was. We are opening and we're going to become more and more open. This is now our future path. And now they clearly see that that was not so. There has been a regression. People see it, they feel it, they talk about it. About Xi Jinping and his stature in the party, he has power in the party, but there are many, many party members, thousands, tens of thousands, who really don't like him. And why? because he spoiled, forgive the pun, he spoiled the party. He cracked down on their good times. He cracked down on corruption. He cracked down on their large budgets to attract foreign investment into China and lavish banquets and trips to Macau. He cracked down and made them be strict little good communist soldiers. And people from the countryside, the counties, up to first tier cities like Shanghai and Beijing, who are in the party, resented this tremendously, as you can imagine. Because of course, to be in the party, you're supposed to have some perks, right? Well, now those perks are gone. The things that the party was turning a blind eye to for a long time, they're things that occur in all countries, are not there for them, under penalty of expulsion, jail, or worse. So I don't see the party as being a tremendously effective institution. It rules because it depends on fear. And
Indeed.
personally,
Indeed.
I think we would agree, fear can only last so long before people decide that they just don't want to be afraid anymore.
Exactly. And in fact, like you rightly said, Xi Jinping is not loved by everybody in the party either. So his decision to appoint himself General Secretary or a Supreme Leader for life, that wouldn't have gone down well with the party or the people. And the more cross-pollination happens between the Chinese people and the rest of us in the democratic, messy world, perhaps that will be an incentive for the Chinese people to take matters in their hand. We don't know. But would you, as a final question, would you think the Chinese Communist Party is at a crossroad? Is at an inflection point? If we have to look at, say, the next 20 years, how would you sort of provide a prognosis of where the Chinese Communist Party would be and consequently where China would be?
If you think about all of the disasters and debacles, some of which I mentioned a minute ago, for which the party has been responsible, the key point to take from that is that those had a domestic impact primarily, whether it be on the main population or on minorities. As bad as those impacts were for so many people, they were domestic. Today, we have a Communist Party of China celebrating, patting itself on the back, its 100-year anniversary of its founding at the same exact moment that the world is beginning to turn and look at it again and say, you are the reason that the COVID-19 virus escaped and probably, maybe, could have been even existed in China in the first place. And you're the reason that our countries have experienced not just job loss, but the death of so many of our citizens. And may I say to you, Nitin, by the way, and to anyone in India listening to this, we wish you all the best. We know you're going through a very bad time, and my condolences to everyone who's been affected and is being affected right now. But China doesn't see it that way, not just towards you in India, but towards anyone in the world. They have used wolf warrior diplomacy to mock and deride and attempt to humiliate anybody who suggests that the virus could have leaked from the Wuhan the Wuhan lab that studies these viruses. Instead of taking a rational, mature, point by point, transparent investigation into it, they refuse, and they refuse angrily and with indignation. This could be an inflection point, but it is up to the people of the world to make it one. If we all recover eventually and we go back to some sense of normalcy and jobs, and we mourn our loved ones who didn't make it, but we go on with our lives, and we don't hold China accountable. Even if, let's take the even if they're not responsible for having created it, they are responsible for having let it go. Because at the same time that they were locking down China, locking down Wuhan, locking down domestic travel within China, they were sending Chinese and anyone who wanted to get on a plane out of Wuhan to international destinations. And that showed what they cared about. They cared about taking care of themselves, and I'm talking about the party, I'm not talking about the people. They cared about controlling the situation domestically, and what happens internationally.
Well, they didn't care for that.
That to me tells me something, but it is up to, I think you're going to see, I think you've seen in both.
You said that, you said it's likely to be an inflection point, and I completely agree with you, because the world must unite to push back against China and its practices. And thank you for your condolences and your concern to the Indian people.
Of course.
So, Bonnie, thank you very much for your time and your insights. Clearly, you are someone who watches China very closely, and we would benefit, our viewers would benefit from your comments and your insights into the Chinese society and the Chinese Communist Party. Thanks for your time, and thank you very much for joining us on this program.
Thank you so much for asking me, Nitin. It's been a great pleasure and honor.
Pleasure. See you around. Thank you very much. So that was China specialist Bonnie Girard speaking to us from the United States about what she feels is the role of the Chinese Communist Party in China today, as it celebrates, as it observes 100 years of its founding. Of course, you know where to reach us, as Strat News Global continues to bring you coverage from all corners of the world, talking to different experts. Do keep watching, and of course, keep sending feedback, comments. You know how to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Do subscribe in large numbers. And of course, our social media handles are there for all to see. Do follow them so that you get updates. And of course, press the bell icon so that you get alerts when we come up with a fresh program. Until the next time, it's goodbye.